Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor. Hello and welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. Today I am flying solo and Brian is going to be really upset that he's missing this one because this man has actually impressed me online, both his personal journey and to be honest, the fact that he probably knows more than most doctors about hunger, satiety, and cholesterol, hormones. But besides that, he's been on a wild journey of weight loss completely on his own. He's lost more than 315 pounds. And he's here to talk to us about his journey. His name is Jason. I'm going to get this right. Jodway?
Yeah, that's it.
Got it. Okay. Jason Jodway. I'm terrible with names, but I got this one right. And he not only has he gone through this amazing journey, really without any medical input, without, completely on his own, which I'm not surprised by, but, I also have to thank him. He's been one of our earliest and biggest supporters of the podcast. So without him, I'm not sure that we would have made it to, 170 episodes that we're at now. So one, thank you for supporting us. And two, thanks for coming on and talking to us and sharing your journey. You strike me as somebody private online. So I know that sharing kind of what you've been through is probably not easy. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So walk us through. So 315 pounds. I don't know where to start. I feel like we're going to get a wealth of information here, but where did it start for you? I think you mentioned your peak weight was about 515 pounds. How did you get there? And can you walk us through kind of, what it was like before you woke up, so to speak? Were you always a big kid?
Yeah. So my journey to hit over 500 pounds started right from early childhood. As far back as I can remember, I was already overweight. I was unquestionably obese by age 5. And just right from then, it just continued on the whole way. Dealing with the pressures of being the single overweight kid. But you're doing what seems like is what everybody else is doing. You're eating the foods that are available. You're watching people eat until they're satiated, and you do the same thing, but you find you're always hungry, want to eat way more than them. Then when I was about 9, because I was so overweight, and all I ever hear from doctors and even adults that care about you is, you got to lose weight, you got to lose weight. So you go see a nutritionist, and they give you the advice that they gave at the time. This is early, mid-90s. So they're focusing it hard on, the grains at the bottom of the food pyramid. And you try to do it, and all you experience is just terrible hunger. And you don't see any results. And you're just stuck there. You're not the same as everybody else.
Were your parents also overweight, or you mentioned being an only child, so you don't have any siblings. So I'm guessing all eyes were on you. Did they also struggle with weight issues?
No, my parents were normal weight, more or less.
Okay, so
it's hard to say with my mother, she was a smoker, and when she quit for a short period of time, she did gain, but that's so common when you quit smoking with all the stress related to it and what was going on. But yeah, I was definitely an outlier when you compare me to my parents.
Right. Okay. So this was this was something unique. And is there anybody else in the family who's overweight or, to the extent, I think you had mentioned to me you went up to 515 pounds by the age 30. Is there anybody in the family like that, or was it just you?
I mean, if you extend out my family tree enough, there were examples. Like my grandmother on my mother's side has gotten somewhat noticeably heavy, but that's mostly postmenopausal and in the current way of things. Her brother, after a car accident, got very, very heavy. So that might be an indication of something.
When you say very heavy, like 300, 400, anybody, 400, or you wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know exactly.
Got it.
This was, more like 1950s-ish. So
Got it. Got it.
it might not be today's notions of
Any current
crazy heavy.
cousins? Yeah, any current cousins or anything like that? When you go to the
Really?
extended
I
family?
mean,
Not
not
really,
really
right?
too much standout, no.
Okay. So I'm guessing, I'm just putting myself, here you are as a kid, 9, 10 years old, your parents see you, they don't have the same appetite issues or weight issues as you, and they want to do probably whatever they can for you. Was it like a loving household? You grew up in a loving household?
Yeah, my parents were separated, so my mom was doing what she could as a single mom. My dad lived uh, like 3-4 hours away. But yeah, it was unquestionably a loving household, and my mom definitely wanted to get me the help that I could use, and that
Right.
was the whole idea behind it.
And so I'm just guessing, I'm going back to my own childhood being overweight and remembering a lot of trauma, a lot of teasing. I remember being in the third grade and first, knowing that I'm bigger than other people. And the ensuing, 5 to 7 years, there was a lot of, bullying and, we've had Brian Wiley, one of our health coaches, talk a lot about that. What was it like, you're Jason, the single, only child, right? Living with a single mom who doesn't understand what's going on, is trying to seek out help. Like, what does it feel like to be you up until high school?
I mean, it definitely leaves you as a noticeable social outlier, and you know, I think the only thing that kept me from being bullied more was that I sort of separated myself because I was always so far advanced from my classmates in math that I was basically taking classes on my own, so I was kind of distanced. And I did, when I was very young, have somewhat of a snappy temper, which was probably in response in a lot of ways to being bullied, just because it was fair game to bully the fat kid.
Right.
But being the fat kid, it did give me that element where if you bully me far enough and I snap in response to it, you're going to get scared. So it did push some of that back a little bit. But I mean, when you're just endlessly hearing from adults, from family, from doctors, or even like I distinctly remember somebody very close to me one time telling me to, eat human proportions. And I was just eating to hunger.
Yeah.
And I'm being told to eat human proportions. It's like, it
They
just
don't, they
feels
didn't
so
understand.
bad.
They didn't understand. And so there's bullying. Yeah, you always strike me as a brilliant guy. I'm telling you, even online, reading your comments, like, I know this is somebody who's just off the charts on his ability to kind of analyze and learn. I've learned from you just through social media. And I, forget about like learning from your struggle. I bet most doctors could probably just learn listening to you analyze science. But so you're really smart at a young age. So you're kind of out, excelling your peers, but a little bit socially withdrawn, huge temper. I mean, how do you handle all this? What's your stress outlet as a kid? Parents are separated. There's some adversity there. You have, there's this picking on. You don't understand your hunger. You think you're different. You're called inhumane. I'm just curious. Did you have any other coping mechanisms as a kid?
I think thankfully for me, I was always very active, which is probably the thing most people would think you aren't when you're like that. No, I played basically every sport you can think of except football. So, there's some activity for me to get to at any time on that. But I also enjoyed plenty of reading. So if I didn't have any of that to do, I could go grab any of my books. That was probably about the way I got around the stress of it.
Got it. So you kind of escaped into books and you did sports. Any any other stress, any basically a really stressful upbringing. Then after so towards the end of high school, do you remember kind of what your weight was?
I mean, I don't
Or
basically
your pant size, maybe you can go by that.
Yeah, my pant size was escalating from like a 4X to a 6X.
Got it.
Basically.
So at the end of high school, you're basically pretty peaked out. And do you go off to college after that?
I only did one semester of college because it didn't seem like it was going to provide me anything towards where I work professionally.
Right.
Make my income. So
you did a semester of college. Did you go away from home or were you still at home?
No, I was at home for that semester.
Got it. Okay. And so what happens next? What happens in your 20s and until I guess you kind of had that aha moment and things have to change. So you mentioned you went to nutritionists, doctors, people in your family, all telling you to eat less, eat human portions, eat, what happens next?
Well, I mean, I just was, doing my business related stuff, focusing on that. Because basically through the whole process, all I ever heard from doctors was you have to lose weight. But yet, I'd never been told anything that was actually useful to that end. And I have observed that people are not all the same. So it gave the impression to me that that's just how I was. I didn't have enough of a knowledge base at the time that maybe there is a different answer. And I had enough respect for the professionals that since what they were telling me didn't make a difference for me, that probably was just how it was.
So basically their inability to educate you about hunger, appetite, satiety, energy, their inability to educate you left you in a place where you blamed yourself and you accepted kind of not defeat. That's not the right word, but you accepted, your relationship to the current food environment as this is the way it is. Right? Does that
pretty
sound about
much?
Right?
That was mostly the nature of it.
And at any point before you hit the age of 30, did you lose a substantial amount of weight?
Not particularly.
No. Okay, so it was just a constant battle. And basically the sizes are getting higher and higher, pretty steady pace. Was there any rapid weight gain, if you look back on your first 30 years?
No, I think it felt more or less pretty consistent. Like as I was growing up, I of course was growing taller and bigger simultaneously. So I was getting, clothing size changes all the time through that. But in adulthood, it was a very sluggish, progressive growth, basically.
Got it. So basically modern, unrelenting appetite, modern food environment, steady weight gain, all throughout your 20s, and then what happens? When does this all turn around? I mean, I could sense I get the sense of a little bit of solitude. You're on your own, emotionally. Sounds like intellectually you're on your own for a long time. I mean, did you have, the people that cared about you, what did they say before things changed? Like, I'm guessing your mom, I mean, sounds like you mentioned she loves you and cares about you. You know, were they also just disenfranchised? Or what was the, who was your support and what did they say up until that point?
I mean, clearly they cared about me and they wanted me to be healthier, but they were just as unaware of how that would work for me as I was. Because, I mean, yes, so my hunger and this entrainment from it towards, seeking out rewarding foods to relieve stresses and emotional tensions, I would be the one that inevitably eats all the stuff in the house. But in principle, I wasn't really doing anything that wasn't the normal. And so, you know, they want me to lose weight and be healthier, but, without the knowledge of actual recommendations to that end, you end up in some ways coming across as almost harmful because
Yeah.
you're just piling on a sense of
Stress.
shame.
Yep.
And it's
Yeah, tell me about this, the shame and the guilt, because growing up, I used to hide my cereal boxes and leave a little bit left in the box so I wouldn't finish it, so it wouldn't look like I finished the whole box. And I used to, hide wrappers of ice cream because of that sense of shame and guilt.
and I can
I'd eat,
completely relate with that because
anything like that.
exactly like that. Because, as I said, when someone close to you is saying eat human proportions, and you're just going, well, I'm hungry, I'm not sated, and I'm still eating. That's just how I feel. I watch you do the exact same thing. And so, you know, when you're going for the food, you got really hungry at some point in the day, and you go get food, and it skews the perception of how much you're eating relative to everybody else. It's like, well, I look like I'm a glutton all the time, and I'm just trying to satisfy my hunger.
So basically, because you had a lack of advice, a lack of good awareness of what is driving your appetite, you basically blamed yourself. Everybody else blamed you. And you turned to medical and health professionals and you got very little guidance on appetite and satiety. And that just continued to make you want to add to the stress because you don't understand it and they don't understand it, and two, you feel blame, guilt, shame. And I mean, it sounds like for somebody who's otherwise high achieving, you kind of found yourself in that area, what we call learned helplessness, where you're just like, uh, you know if this was business, probably at that point, you probably wouldn't have accepted a defeat like that because you're trained in business. You have a strong analytical mind, right? But there was something with food that made us feel responsible, right? And flawed. And do you think that that would be accurate, or does that sound right?
There was definitely an element of learned helplessness.
Yeah.
Like on a mental level, I had to have an acceptance that the way I was just because I was different in some way from everybody else, or I am literally just a glutton. I'm this undisciplined person, yet I could display all of these traits just fine in other elements of my life.
So it wasn't a discipline issue, right? You were highly successful, probably. I'm guessing you were highly successful. I mean, it sounds like, you mentioned you were well ahead of your colleagues in math growing up in school. Yeah, it's interesting. So at what point does this, I'm guessing something happened, that made you want to reevaluate this whole thing. So what, can you walk us through that? Now you're 510 pounds, and what sparks the rest of this journey?
So this is something I've learned recently. As I have hypermobility connected with Ehlers-Danlos, and one of the connected traits to this is autonomic dysfunction. And I was under.
It's a fluctuating blood pressure, guys. So you can have a fluctuating blood pressure, fluctuating heart rate, and some other, issues. Is that what you're talking about? Autonomic dysfunction? Got it.
And so the fluctuations in that, the fluctuations in epinephrine, can at times make me particularly susceptible to anxiety. And I was under some life stresses at that point. And I just ate some food during a day, and then sitting at my desk, I had tachycardia, heart rate over 120 for just hours upon hours. And I was so anxiety stressed out by that, I eventually went into the emergency department and just made sure nothing was wrong. But it triggered me to be in such an incredible anxiety state that I just, kind of sort of slammed the brakes on my life and went, I have to do something.
So it's like a wake up moment where enough was enough.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It was just an event that pushed my motivation to basically a 12 out of 10. I will figure something out.
Now, so walk me through, because I relate to that. Walk me through what happens next. Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, like, where do you go? I'm guessing you're trying to wrap your head around it now.
So immediately following that, I'm just, thinking of the things that we've all been told endlessly. You gotta energy restrict on your diet. Vegetables are the good stuff. But something I also knew is that when you're dieting, you need to keep your protein high so you don't lose all your lean mass. So basically, because at the time up till then, I was not someone who ate beef. So I just went ahead and got all the chicken breasts I wanted, threw some vegetables with it, and ate a relatively low energy chicken breast rich diet as I was just dealing with this mass anxiety, just trying to survive.
So you're going through anxiety, panic, and now you're like, okay, let me stick to what the mantra is: high protein, high fiber, and low energy. And that's where you started. And what happens?
Well, I'm just doing that for a few weeks. I'm walking, getting in bursts of like 10, 15 minutes of walks when I can. And then I start, looking into it. And the first thought I had in my mind, because this is, again, part of why everybody's endlessly telling you, to lose weight, is I'm probably type 2 diabetic. So my first thought is, let's assume I'm type 2 diabetic. How should I deal with this? And that got me looking into the research.
What did you find? And so this was 5 years ago, right?
Almost 5 years ago now.
Okay.
The interesting part is, starting out, I saw the low fat data, where if you keep fat super low and you give only carbohydrates, each time you get higher glucose tolerance, a little bit more insulin sensitivity. And this is definitely scientifically correct. But as I was looking into this research, I just had this basic thought: well, type 2 diabetes is a state of carbohydrate intolerance or glucose intolerance. So it just doesn't make sense to actually consume glucose in that context. And so from there,
it's like such a simple thought, right? And yet the ADA, hasn't, even today, they don't acknowledge that thought. In 2019, when they changed the guidelines from, with the Yancey and Hallberg's kind of nudging, if you look at the guidelines that they have, it still says weight loss and decreased energy are the, things to focus on, even though they do recommend reducing carbohydrates now, and list low carb. So even look at the most premier endocrinologists and dietitians. They still don't get this concept that 5 years ago you got, so it's funny. You have to have an analytical mind and a mind that questions mantra, right? Because that's not the mantra. 5 years ago, it was like, no, carbs don't matter, right? Or they don't matter much.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you don't take things on face value from authority figures. And especially for me, it wasn't a hard concept to really challenge that, because the very fundamentals of science is that you don't actually prove anything. You just accumulate data so that we can be less uncertain. We have greater probability of not being wrong. And so I'm not going to take the authority statement on something. I'm actually going to look at the data and really consider where the uncertainty lies. That's just how I am when it comes to science.
So what happens? Where do you turn? What are you looking for? And
so I had that conclusion that it doesn't really make any sense to be consuming carbs if I'm assuming I'm type 2 diabetic. So I'm going to look into the concept of a very low carbohydrate diet. And from there, I found resources like Diet Doctor. That was the first one that got me really seeing things. That led to YouTubes by Ted Naiman, Dr. Jason Fong. I got connected to the books by Volek and Finney, the Two Keto Dudes podcast. So I'm getting exposed to all this stuff, and I'm explicitly not finding any scientific basis to contraindicate a very low carbohydrate diet, except some extremely rare genetic situations. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this thing. It makes sense.
what happens next? So you were doing chicken and broccoli up until then, right? I guess now you're going into the literature over weeks and months. And what?
Chicken, broccoli, other vegetables, a small amount of fruit, because again, I did start out with the low-fat mantra information, and it is scientifically accurate for what they're looking at in terms of glucose uptake as it is defined by, a glucose clamp with insulin.
Well, I would even disagree that it's not scientifically accurate. I mean,
there's contextual elements to it, but like what they are explicitly saying is scientifically accurate. But again,
still
come
disagree.
back to just
like Walter Willett lumps fruits and fruits with vegetables to say that fruits are healthy with epidemiologic data, right?
I throw all epidemiological data for nutrition straight in the trash. I don't care what it says, whether we like what it says or not.
Good. Well, look, I always learn, and then you know the info, and then you decide to throw it out. So I'm with you on throwing it out.
I don't even want the mental bias of just saying, oh, hey, there was something I agree with in it. Like, I just know it's not enough scientific certainty for me to consider it valid. So I just put it in the trash bin.
Well, even that invalidation, right? So like when I think of it the other way around, when we look at the effect of, let's say, fresh meat, and you see how when you control for healthy users, like as you control for, like, let's say somebody who takes a daily multivitamin, that signal decreases. When you look at somebody who goes to the doctor regularly, that signal, that initial risk decreases. So, it does still tell you something, right? And even though the data is like useless, I agree with you. You can still learn, okay, based on playing with that data, and comparing it to other pieces of data, it fits somewhere. But I agree with you. It's, if you're trying to make a strict conclusion based off it, you're going to be, you're going to find yourself in a terrible place. But I mean, they've done even interventional studies where they give fruits and vegetables to people, and there's no major outcomes. So I don't, yes, having fruits, I guess some fructose and some carbs, I guess may increase the carb oxidation, but the general theory is that it actually helps a diabetic or helps a person. I'm not sure that it's ever really been shown.
The scientific truth that I'm referring to, it comes back to the same concept as where just simply fasting a person for a long enough period of time impairs their glucose uptake via a clamp. So so they're using that basic physiological aspect to say, carbs are insulin sensitizing or glucose tolerance improving, and that from that standpoint it is scientifically accurate. It doesn't apply in any relevant way to a type 2 diabetic who's in a state where they can't properly tolerate ingesting it in the first place.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So okay, you're looking at you're coming from the low fat mantra, now exposed to the keto zealots, and what happens next?
And so up to that point, I had been doing, a relatively lower energy diet, and being so heavy, getting in some walking, I was definitely losing weight during this part. And I would say that the reason it was working as well as it was for me at the time is because I was probably incredibly ketogenic already. Yeah. I just wasn't as consciously aware of that. And so I decided, I'm gonna do this very low carbohydrate ketogenic approach. But while I'm adapting to it, not realizing I basically already was, I didn't want to aim to lose weight for 2, maybe 3 weeks. And so I was just cooking up some stir fries that were not specifically low fat anymore. And I was expecting to eat, a couple times a day. Didn't necessarily want to cook more than that for these complex stir fries. And I would eat the first one, and then, I would actually get a sensation of being sated. And then it would be, 6-8 hours later when I'm supposed to have that second meal for the day, and I was so disinterested in food that I just didn't make another meal. And it was the first time that I truly experienced that.
Basically eating protein, vegetable, a little bit of fat until you're full. Right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So, I mean, 35 years of your life or 32 years of your life, and now you know what they all felt like.
Yeah, I would say when I started out, now I'm not going to pretend that it's the same now that I've lost all of that extreme amount of body fat I had accumulated. But yeah, starting out, that's basically how it felt. It felt like, wow, suddenly I'm like what everyone expects you to be. You eat what is a more reasonable amount of food in total. I still have, through this whole process, my stomach has absolute massive capacity. So the meal itself, I was making a big stir fry. It wasn't a small volume-wise meal, but
would you say like 1.5 pounds of meat?
Easily.
Yeah. Okay. So pretty good stir fry, and so you're eating these, and how monotonous does your diet become at that point? I'm just curious. So this is like a year into.
No, this is only like a couple months into it.
Got it.
Okay. I landed on this pretty quickly because, in my anxiety state, I was now very motivated to do the research. And again, like I said, as soon as I was just looking at it from a basic level, I concluded this made sense to do if I assume I'm diabetic. So it didn't take me that long to land on it.
And okay, so now you're 6 months in. Probably, I'm guessing you dropped like, I don't know, 50 pounds in the first 5 months. And then within a year to 2 years, I remember we talked about this. I think in 2 years you pretty much lost 200 plus pounds. Like what was that like now? What are people saying about the way you eat? What do you do you have a clear vision of what you're doing? What's going on in your head at that point? Now I'm sure you're seeing a little bit of weight loss already.
Yeah. I mean, after a couple of months of just moving in the right direction, those closest to me and my family are already, they're having a positive response to it, because it was the first time in that 30 years of my life that I was seemingly moving in the right direction, despite, my attempts prior.
What do they say when you're eating 2 pounds of meat and a big stir fry?
Well, in my case, thankfully, my family is very aware of my ability, my intellect and ability to look into things.
Right.
So they don't necessarily question me when I'm, say I'm doing something for a reason.
Got it. Are your parents also kind of as analytical as you?
I would say my father is. My mother, not so much, but to an extent in a different way.
What do you mean?
Well, she worked in accounting, so she did have elements of it.
Right.
But
got it. Okay. So, but they trust your ability to analyze and plan and move forward.
Yeah.
Do you have any other support during this time? I mean, you mentioned diet doctor is a big support, 2 keto dudes is a big support. But any other like local support, or is this just again Jason on his own?
This is Jason on his own.
Got it. Okay. But I mean, we're all human. We all yearn for support. We all yearn for community. I mean, now you're losing weight, what happens next?
Well, I mean, my anxiety settled down, especially because now I was moving in a healthier direction, and that was a massive release of stress in of itself. That was.
You think it was the ketones, or you think it was just the positive improvement, or both?
I imagine that being in ketosis definitely helps. It's definitely something that I noticed from the autonomic standpoint. It definitely influences the neurotransmitters in the brain to an extent to relieve that anxiety. But it was definitely, from a primary standpoint, just that
a win.
I was having a health win finally.
Yeah.
I was moving in a direction that could actually present myself with the hope that I could be healthy, and not that I was doomed to this is how I am.
So what happens as you finish up that first year or the second year? Any adversity, any tribulations, any trials throughout that time?
I mean, well, around the first year, so there's very real stressful moment around the year mark, because my mother actually had a heart attack just before my 1-year anniversary.
Oh my God, I'm sorry to hear that.
So
she okay? I hope she's okay.
Sadly, she passed away from that heart attack.
I'm sorry to hear that, Jason.
I appreciate that.
And you live with your mom. That must have been I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was a very serious blow for our family.
And it sounds like you really didn't have much, like she was a cornerstone for your support. I mean, not like psychologically with low carb, but just everything else in your life, right? You mentioned that you stayed with your mom.
Yeah, we were definitely support system to each other, for sure.
Wow. How did you deal with that? How did you deal with that huge stress?
I mean, during the process of it, I just forced myself to stay the track with my diet, you know, because I expected if I went off it, and that would snowball me in so many different bad ways. Uh, I made my life easy. I basically made pseudo pizza or pasta, just put some sauce in a bowl with meat, cheese to get decent food in through that process. And I
So you made
got on it.
some like low carb replacements because you found yourself craving those foods, or
Well, so my lifelong favorite food was essentially pasta or lasagna, with pizza being the next. And I kind of learned that really it's just the sauce that was the driving factor. That for me, I don't even need the pasta in there. I'm totally fine without it. And so it was basically kind of a low carb variant comfort food for me.
got it. So I'm just curious, like huge period of stress in your life, you find that you need a little bit more comfort, I guess. Did you turn to anything else besides low carb comfort food?
Just that, and if I was feeling especially stressed out, just getting on a treadmill,
So you
trying
use
to
exercise kind of to relieve stress.
just to an extent for that situation. It doesn't usually work for me. I usually respond in a undesirable way to just forcing exercise. As I said, I was into all sports as a kid. Sports
Right,
are great for me. Just exercising is not generally
right.
something. But
And you have Ehlers-Danlos, so the joints can get affected with that, and you can't. There's that whole other component of things. Injury is a big deal in that community.
the number of times I've come close to dislocating my knees,
Right.
especially when I was heavier, is oof.
Yeah. So what happens next? What happens in year two? I mean, it sounds like a huge hit to you emotionally, psychologically, but somehow you're able to just kind of, you don't want to let go of what's working. So what happens next? I remember talking to you 2 years in, and you were down 230 pounds. So there's a little,
And I mentally worked my way through having to be the one to make all the decisions around my mother's heart attack. She was in the hospital for 5 or 6 days before finally passing, and I was the one that legally had to make that call that it was time for that to happen. Uh, and then processing through that as an individual and as a family, and yeah, just stuck to the plan as best I could, pretty much. Just trying to get out, get morning walks in at the very least, and stay on track with the food. Don't let myself get back to drinking soda or having any of the treats, because I just definitely never want to go back to that place.
yeah. And at what point was fighting away from that shame? You know, what did that? I remember our prior conversations talked about shame as being a motivator for you. Um, what happens next? That perseverance, like where does that come from? I'm just trying to sense that this is somebody who, failed at obesity his whole life. And now where do you cultivate that perseverance from? And, the fact that you're probably not only are you persevering, you're analyzing, what do I need to make this win? You have that tenacity component. You're faced with an immense hardship. You're like, you know what, I'll just hack a low carb food for myself. You're now, it's not learned helplessness anymore. It's the exact opposite. It's like, I'll do whatever it takes to win, quote unquote, win. But I'm just trying to get a sense of how that evolved.
Well, I mean, for me, it's just a general mentality of how I'm dealing with everything. Always looking for, the data to make improvements through this whole process. Because I had become so interested and invested in the topic, I'm endlessly researching. So that's always keeping me, focused on the things that can matter and have valuable output from. I'm still listening to the podcast. So in an indirect way, I'm getting support, exactly like the stories you hear from people like you and me on this podcast are just great ways of support. Everybody has their struggles at times. I certainly still had mine.
When you say your struggles, help me understand, because my sense of you is you've always been winning. So walk me through. I mean, you're 2 years in, you're down 230 pounds. And I know now you're down 310, 315 pounds. What were your hardest moments in the past 3 years? Have you ever gone off keto or low carb?
So, yeah. Well, the easiest way to avoid having problems is being able to control the environment so that you're not pressured by it, or you don't have any choices to make to avoid bad things. It just, it takes away any notions of willpower when our brains don't necessarily have a limitless or necessarily even any capacity of that, depending on, what you're being exposed to. And so probably my first major stint off of it is I went to a friend's wedding in New Jersey, so I wasn't at home, and I wasn't able to remain perfect in that environment, though I did pretty reasonably well.
You came to Jersey and you didn't visit us? Now I'm offended, Jason.
I'm sorry.
I'm offended.
I was
just kidding.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So you go, and did that feeling of satiety get robbed from you when you brought back the carbs, or when you couldn't be perfect?
I mean, any notion of satiation definitely is not it. It always falls back to being able to eat until my stomach is so ridiculously full, my brain says, please stop.
Got it. So you result on bloating of the stomach to really give you that signal to stop. Right?
It is incredibly hard for me to get the satiation.
How many pounds of meat do you think you can eat? You think you could out eat me?
To answer that question, I will just say that I have had 8 pounds before.
8 pounds?
8 pounds. And I was not satiated at the end of that.
Wow.
I simply ran out.
Yeah, I've done, I think the most I've done is 4.5 to 5 pounds. So I'm close, but not that close. Wow. That's a tough life, man. It's just so you guys understand, my wife can eat half a slice of pizza and feel the bloat in her stomach, right? There's that stretch receptors in the stomach send a signal to the brain that, hey, you're really full. And that's a defense for a lot of people, that they can rely on to maintain their weight. But Jason has none of that. So he needs other signals to give him some sense of satiety. And those signals are, one of them is keeping a stable blood sugar, having ketones, hormonal factors from having a higher fat, higher protein diet. These are things that he can rely on, knowing that he doesn't have those other, that his stretch receptors are shot. So what was it? So you went off keto, and what happens next? How do you, I mean, did the weight come back? Did you gain weight? Did you, what?
I mean, I can guarantee that when I was around all the cake and whatnot, around that wedding, that I gained some weight during that. But that was, only for a few days, thankfully. And from there, I moved on and got back into the environment where I can more control things for myself.
And what was your total weight gain? 5, 10, 15, 20? Like, what was your, I'm just curious.
I didn't even want to bother. I was also traveling. So actually measuring that would have been harder.
Okay. And then this was 3 years ago?
Yeah, like 3.5.
And then, so I know you lost about 100 pounds from that point. So
and then the next standout time when I really, really lost it, leading up to the following Thanksgiving, there was a really, really stressful family situation, and we sort of gathered together and we were going to celebrate Thanksgiving together. And I was in that environment for 2 weeks before Thanksgiving and a bit afterwards. And I assume because I'd been pushing so hard to lose weight up till then, and then I was so stressed out during that I basically was a vacuum.
that was my nickname.
Binge. Yeah.
Growing up, that's what all my cousins, my family called me. They called me the vacuum cleaner.
We would have pre-cooked burgers in the refrigerator, and I just couldn't stop myself from eating them.
Who's we? Sorry, I didn't understand that part. So we,
because I was staying with, it was all of the family together. It was my grandparents, my aunt, uncle, myself.
Got it. Okay.
And so, they're much more normal about how they deal with food. So, when they're making burgers, they'd make extra burgers and we'd have extra fish. And I just was so hungry all the time under that context that I would just go eat all the plain burgers and plain fish, things that people think you will not binge on. I was binging on them.
So stress-induced hyperphagia, basically. You're stressed out. It's leading you, whether it's robbing you of your willpower from a blood flow standpoint, whether it's glycemic variability due to stress hormones, whether it's just giving you a need for comfort, doesn't really matter. Maybe all three of them, you find yourself eating more.
Yeah. Of course,
now you see the pattern. Knowing you're an analytical guy, you probably see that.
I see it, and in part, again, it was probably reinforced by the fact that I was in this environment with family, and they don't exclusively eat like I do, so there's other foods around.
Yep.
And again, even though you'll say, oh, nobody binges on plain meat, well, I binged through all the plain meat, and then I was still ravenously hungry. So in an environment where there's still lots of other things to go after, I would end up eating some of the other stuff too. And yeah, over the process of this through Thanksgiving, before eventually going home at the start of December, I probably put on 30 pounds, maybe 40, just in such a rapid rate right there.
Yeah, so one, this is knowledge, right? This is great knowledge for you. Stress is a big trigger for you, and being in front of food any food, right? Being in front of any food under that environment is not great for you, but particularly, foods that are not fitting your paradigm, right? You can endlessly eat other foods, maybe near endlessly for meat, but it's not going to support your life goal really if you're eating those higher carb foods. Any food
Yeah,
really, but those higher carb foods.
like just to give an example, they love to point out fruit as like nobody got fat on fruit, or
Oh, I can get fat
fruit
on
is
fruit.
fine. And for me, I'm not saying fruit is bad, but for
Yeah.
me, I can eat, I can make a small bowl of blueberries and start eating them, and wherever my hunger was before that, even
It's higher.
even if I had just eaten pounds of meat, my hunger will spike to a 12. I will eat again
Yes.
absolutely everything I can until my stomach screams at me, please stop, and I will still be ravenously hungry for 2+ hours.
Yeah. People don't understand the sweet taste, the sugar, whatever it is, all of the above. I've whittled it down to being just the sweet taste. I can eat more hamburger patties after I'm full and done if I add ketchup. I can eat more food if I have berries, or it doesn't matter what it is. The sweet taste is definitely a trigger for me. I've pretty much concluded that. And there's pretty much no way to eat. I would not eat, like, those strawberries that are like, they don't even taste good because they're out of season, and there's no, even though they probably have the same amount of carbohydrate, I wouldn't binge on those. I mean, maybe I'd eat them, but not like to the extent I would. And my hunger wouldn't increase the same way it would without that sweet taste. So what happened? But you lost 100 pounds after that,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I basically said, okay, this happened. It's done. It's over with. I learned from it. I got to stay on top of being excessively stressed out, and making sure I get my sleep, and if I'm in other environments, I got to do my best that I can to set them up favorably for me so that this sort of stuff doesn't happen. And I would say in a certain thankfulness with the way the last year has been, that I haven't had any strong reasons to be outside the household a lot. I've kind of gotten to the point where foods that I don't register as foods. So there's peanut butter in the household. There's nuts in the household. I mean,
And you just know they make you hungry.
Well, I don't even, the point I'm getting to is I don't even think about them anymore. I've sort of distanced myself from the brain connection of that so much, given time, that when I get hungry now, and then like, anxiety hunger sort of concept, I'm thinking about grabbing all the brisket out of my freezer and throwing it in the Instant Pot. I'm not thinking about eating all the nuts.
Yeah.
So
yeah, because you know which one is going to be the least. That's funny. I tell people, and we've seen it again and again, that the stress and anxiety induced hyperphagia, meaning that hunger, over time, as you eliminate those highly rewarding foods, you won't have the same response. We did a case series on that where we gave people, we literally gave them low carb chocolate if they were binging chocolate, and their symptoms of their cravings, their binging symptoms, and their food addiction scale decreased. So I think that given enough time, some of these signals can rewire. In my own self, I'd say it took years.
It could definitely take time, and because of all the different layers that are attached to your memory of reward in these foods, it really does take time to turn those circuits off and have new circuits active as the one your brain most wants to respond to.
I can't agree with that. I can't agree more. I can't agree more. So you went from 510 pounds. So now what's your current weight?
Last I checked was 195.
Holy shit. Sorry. Jack, bleep that out. And what's your height, Jason?
6 feet.
So you've reached a quote unquote normal weight.
clinically, I'm still overweight.
Nah, fuck clinically. Oh my God, I got that out too, but fuck clinically. So
Yes, and that's the mentality to have towards it, because
yeah,
otherwise it gets in your head that someone who has the excess skin I have because of my condition,
yeah,
like I've actually heard people have like how much weight they lost when they had
20
excess skin
pounds.
dealt with.
You'll probably lose 20 pounds.
Yeah, the minimum I would expect I would lose would put me in normal weight. So
Wow. Wow. This is the power of focusing on hunger, satiety, appetite, stress, anxiety, sleep. I mean, we say this again and again and again. I mean, look, it really is a testament to carbohydrate restriction, first and foremost. But if you look at our levers, we created a document in our practice, our levers for weight loss. Really, first is carbohydrate restriction. Second is meal frequency. Third is added fat, and that's third, right? If you really needed any, if you really needed it. Fourth is exercise. Fifth is extended fasts, which we don't really use often. And then sixth and seventh is stress and sleep. And it sounds like you hit each one of those along your way. It's just an amazing story. What do people say in your life? What do people care about you say, seeing what they've, and how are you going to maintain this forever? What's going to cause Jason Jodway to go back?
I don't really see what would cause me to go back. I mean, I'm actually not in any way a keto zealot. I'm just hunting the research, looking for, if I see something is objectively better. But for me, again, I've seen nothing to contraindicate, and the special properties of being on a ketogenic diet. It keeps me from being excessively hungry all the time, and it intrinsically avoids the foods that spike my hunger to a 12.
Yeah.
And it, with my condition, means I will try to eat everything that is available to eat.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to tell you, well, I would caution you to learn from your prior tribulations. Well, first of all, I'm learning from you. Everything that you're saying here is something that every doctor really should pay attention to. But I think if I were you, and this isn't medical advice, maintaining stress, preparing the way you do, and managing your stress, knowing how you respond to stress. I cannot see, managing your anxiety, and I think that those are probably paramount. You have a clear vision, right? You have a very clear vision, and it's led to immense success. And now what would be the insult to that vision? If I sleep deprive Jason, put him in front of, hyperpalatable food and give him no other way out, take away his blood flow to his frontal cortex, right? Through stress and anxiety, what are we going to get? Probably the same one you had for a very long time, same Jason you had for a very long time. This just sounds like an amazing story, man. And you are truly literally one in a million in terms of that weight loss, and maintaining it now 5 years. So
almost 5 years now.
Yeah, good for you, man. Good for you, and keep it up. And thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your story. And before, we part ways, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, I don't know, talk to you, how would they do that?
I suppose the best way is just message me on Twitter. I'm always willing to help people out who are really looking for an answer.
I'm sure people have come to you with advice, right? They've seen you lose 315 pounds. I'm sure you're already helping them. Has anybody else in your life been affected by your weight loss?
Sadly, I would not be strongly saying they have, mostly because we just are in the world we're in right now. So people are dealing with a lot of things. They're inundated by the environment, and it takes a level of commitment to sort of pre-structure and commit to these approach is to stick to it when everything is setting you up to be stressed out and want to reach for other things.
Yeah, I say this all the time. If we take a population, stress them out, give them free Krispy Kreme and free Happy Meals, and make 2-for-1 Johnny Walker deals, we're not going to end up with a healthy population. So I'm with you. Any last minute tips for somebody listening who's 510 pounds and is just starting their journey?
I think the best tip I can probably give is to, using your words, plan for your worst day. Make your decisions on how you want to do things when you are in a comfortable, safe place. Put the rules together and keep it as simple as possible for you to execute on in the moment. The more complexity you have to apply to yourself in your decision making, the more likely you are to fall through the cracks somewhere.
Absolutely. Plan for your worst day. That's our advice. We call it binge low carb, live to fight another day, which it sounds like you've been doing for 5 years and losing 300 pounds doing it.
And if I have to add one other thing, when you inevitably stumble, immediately forgive yourself. It happens for all of us.
Yeah. Amen. Jason, thank you so much. One, for sharing your story. Two, for being one of our biggest supporters of this podcast. So thank you for sharing your story and your insights. And I know people are going to be impacted from this. And thank you for supporting us. We appreciate it. Hopefully we'll reach more and more people.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.